Kuphina kuphi emakhaya emadolobheni asekomplasta khona lapho kubukela khona SABC 1 sakubukela kumbukele. Welcome to this week's edition of Yilungelo Lakho, It's Your Right. Mbukele ke uma ke sishona khumbula ukuthi sishiyela abantu bethu ke nalabo lesibanakekelako timali tekubasita ke nalabo ke lesibashiya ngemuva ikakhulukazi ke bantwana ke tonke leto timali tingamela lehovisi le Guardians Fund leliphethwe ke lehovisi lemgcini mafa phecelezi iMaster's Office. Inkinga lenkulu ke bekunene ukuthi ke bantu labanengi abayadi ukuthi isebenza kanjani ke le Guardians Funds nende ukuthi ke tindlela tekuthi bathole leto timali nemalungelo abo kwanyelo kasingena endzabeni yethu namhla. Several millions of rand belonging to beneficiaries of the Guardians Fund remain unclaimed, all because not much is known by the consumers about this particular fund, how it works, and the processes of accessing those funds. And that is why every single year the Department of Justice publishes the names of those who have not claimed to come forward. Kusitshela ke kabadi ukuthi yini kahle kahle i-Guardians Fund ngubani ke kumele ukuthi atfole leto timali nekuthi ke yini bathengile kumele ukuthi bayadi ngalolu hlelo asasimukele ke via Skype. Well, we hope to be joined by Yilungelo Lakho ke ehhovisi le Master of the High Court. Siphinde sibe na Giselle Gould lomele ke i-Fairheads Benefit Solution, and she joins us via Skype. Giselle, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mpiwe. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, let's first start the discussion by distinguishing between the beneficiary fund and the Guardians Fund. What is the difference between the two?
The beneficiary fund is a legal vehicle that was established in the Pension Funds Act in 2009, and that was basically to take care of children whose parents have passed on and were members of retirement funds, and the remains in their pension fund then gets allocated to the children for their benefit and for their upkeep and for actually raising them until they become majors.
So could you explain the various circumstances in which the funds, such as the inheritance, the death benefits, would end up in the Guardians Fund?
So yeah, to answer your question with regards to the Guardians Fund was established quite some time ago, and that was initially to accommodate people who pass on intestate, meaning that they don't have a will, there's no indication what needs to happen to their assets, and therefore the state would then place those assets in the Guardians Fund, and the Master of the High Court would then decide how to allocate those assets. So that was initially the purpose of the Guardians Fund, but it has also extended to other needs to serve other purposes as well, of which one is then for the GPF, which is the Government Employees Pension Fund. In the event of members becoming deceased in that fund, the assets that needs to be transferred to their children has also been placed in the Guardians Fund. So if you look at the Guardians Fund today, and I suppose your guest will come on with regard to the Guardians Fund, about 80% of what's in the Guardians Fund actually belong to the GPF, and the balance belongs to estates, which are your interstate estates.
In terms of allocating the various assets to the different portfolios, who then issues out the instruction that certain funds should go to the Guardian Fund or the beneficiary fund?
So in terms of the Guardians Fund, the trustees of the GPF, which is, I mentioned, the Government Employees Pension Fund, they will decide that the money goes to the Guardians Fund, okay, and then those assets are then invested with the PIC, which is the Public Investment Corporation, and they then decide how to invest those monies. In the Guardians Fund, the returns that are guaranteed for children is 7.5% per annum.
So are the funds only accessible when a minor or a beneficiary reaches the age of 18?
The intention of the funds in the GPF is to assist with the maintenance and the upkeep and the raising of that child as well. To what extent that happens, I'm not 100% sure. But in the beneficiary fund, for instance, just to go back to that one, if a retirement fund allocates a child's monies to a beneficiary fund, those monies are then transferred to the beneficiary fund. The beneficiary fund has a board of trustees, and the board of trustees then decide how those assets will be invested. And obviously, one thing that you can imagine in terms of investing children's monies, that it's very important that it is invested in a responsible way and not to expose them onto undue risk.
Okay, Giselle, please stay on the line. We'll certainly continue this conversation in a moment. Let's now welcome on the line Vuyani Lali. He's a Deputy Master of the Cape Town High Court. Vuyani, very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for inviting me, and especially the Department of Justice, Master of the High Court. Really appreciate it.
All right. Now, Giselle was just taking us through the various differences between the GF or the Guardians Fund, I beg your pardon, and the beneficiary fund. What is the difference between the two, and under what circumstances is the allocation of the various assets being directed to a particular fund?
Yeah, the difference between the GPF and the Guardians Fund is that we are governed by the administration of Estates Act 65 of 1966. 66 of 1965. And therefore, what happens, we normally receive monies from GPF, inheritances for known and unknown people. Normally, we receive it for inheritance and from the GPF. Hello?
Yes, please carry on, Vuyani. How did the Guardians Fund come about?
The Guardian Fund came about in respect of the administration of Estate Act 66 of 1965. Bear in mind that we are regulated by the Act, and therefore whatever we are doing it in terms of the Act. In other words, we are functus officio. What we do according to the Act.
Okay, so nginayo yini a choice of placing the funds, Guardians Fund, or is it simply compulsory?
It's not compulsory, but if the will makes provision that monies must be deposited into the Guardians Fund, then it means that the executor who's dealing with that estate doesn't have a choice. Or if he wants to invest the monies, for instance, elsewhere, therefore he will have to provide security. And the disadvantage is that he or she won't be able to use those funds until the minor becomes 18.
Okay, so who then issues the instruction that these funds should fall under the Guardians Fund or the Beneficiary Fund or any other fund for that matter?
Normally, we do have assistant masters who deals with estates. Or maybe the will provide for that the monies must be deposited into the Guardians Fund. Because bear in mind that every time we deal with an estate, our interest will always be to look for the minor, because the minor cannot protect his or her own interest. Yes. So in terms of protecting the minor's interest, those funds must be coming into the Guardians Fund.
All right, Vuyani, please stay on the line. We'll certainly continue this conversation after the break. Let's take a pause for now. Please call us on the numbers on your screen, 0117146918 or 0117146919, and share your thoughts and perhaps your experiences. Yilungelo Lakho asisishiyelele ngasetitolo. You can call our studio lines on the numbers on the screens right now, 0117146918, 0117146919. You can also email your thoughts to consumer@sabc.co.za. Facebook. Guardians Fund, Beneficiary Fund. Who is supposed to claim for that particular fund? Processes Sina Giselle Gould, she's the Director of Business Development at the Fairheads Benefit Services. We also have the Deputy Master of the High Court in Cape Town, Vuyani Lali. Now, Giselle, let me bring you into this conversation. I want you to explain the relationship between, how a will affects the Guardian Fund and how that particular will, should direct how the funds should be claimed.
I think Vuyani would be better suited to answer that question because he deals directly with that. I will deal with the beneficiary fund questions.
Okay, in the beneficiary fund, then what happens to those claims which are to those funds which have been unclaimed?
So unclaimed funds in the beneficiary fund is the duty of the trustees to actually trace that child and that dependent.
Okay.
So that is something we take very seriously, and we make sure that on an annual basis we check that we know where that child is, that he or she is still living with the legal guardian or caregiver that has been indicated, and we keep track of them, of their whereabouts. Make sure they're still at the same address and all of that, so that we make sure we can actually ensure that that child benefits from his or her assets that have been left for him or her.
Okay, so can I appoint any company to do the tracing for me?
The Board of Trustees of the Beneficiary Fund needs to appoint the tracing service providers. And in doing so, they have to go through a due diligence process to ensure that it is legit, that it is not any bogus kind of situation. So it's the trustees' duty to ensure that it is a proper entity, properly registered, and do reference checks and all of those kind of things to make sure they are actually acquiring the service from a legitimate body.
So is there a time frame with regards to how long the funds can remain unclaimed for?
So normally, if you cannot get hold of the child or the caregiver or legal guardian, if after 2 years you still haven't managed to do that, that is when, according to the Pension Funds Act, that benefit becomes unclaimed. But it is obviously encouraged, by the Board of Trustees instructing the administrator that they stay in touch with that family. And that is crucial, because if you've placed your children's assets in a beneficiary fund, the intention is to help maintain them, and therefore the intention is that the administrator needs to stay in touch with that family so that child can actually fully benefit from his or her assets.
So in short, if after 2 years the funds remain unclaimed, then that particular beneficiary forfeits it to the state?
No, they don't. Not in a beneficiary fund. In a beneficiary fund, the trustees has the duty to find that child. There is no prescription period by which they have to transfer to the guardian's fund. Okay. So it can stay in that fund as long as it needs to ensure that they can actually find that child.
Okay. All right. Vuyani, let me also bring you into this conversation. Giselle was just taking us through what normally happens if funds in the beneficiary fund remain unclaimed. But then in the guardian fund, is there a particular prescription period, or is there a time frame for which the funds can remain unclaimed for?
Yeah, about 30 years.
Go by 30 years or 13 years? I didn't quite get that.
30.
30 years.
30 years, yeah.
Okay.
Until 30 years.
And then after the 30-year period?
After the 30-year period, we start to receive off revenue.
Which means low beneficiary we forfeit kule state. And do you think it's fair though? Would see maybe the Master of the High Court's office was not able to successfully trace that particular person? There are funds that are in the Guardian Fund.
Yeah, the problem is because China as a Guardian Fund as it traces. Now in the end, the for 30 years as in then basifumanile sikwazile uyiphika up sazibhatala ngemini ethile then siyakwazi ulayeza lo that and then azibuyisele back. But amaxesha amaninzi xa ingumntana ayifani yenzeke loo nto. Enye into esiba nengxaki nayo because imali zethu xa zi-advertiswa kwi-government gazette. Sasikhe sazama ke sizame ezi mali maziphume kwamaphepha kwezi community newspapers so that abantu bakwazi usifumana, but ke yinto esisayijongayo nangoku leyo.
So leyo mali leyo ke iyatala yini njoba ke abantu basafuna beneficiary ayo? In short, does it accumulate interest, and if so, how much interest?
I-interest current rate per annum is 5%. So
le interest itholwa ngubani?
I-interest itholwa yi-beneficiary leyo.
Okay.
If idlulile kwi-age of 24, let's say sine-scenarios ezimbini.
Yeah.
If umntana let's say ayiclaim imali yakhe at 18, then ithetha ukuthi uyayifumana i-interest yakhe. If umntu let's say adlule i-age of 24, then i-interest iyama because andithi mos izobe seyingumuntu omdala. And normally we don't cater for interest for abantu abadala. The only time kuzoba interest for umuntu omdala is when that person is a patient or mentally incapable of managing his or her own affairs.
Okay.
Kulapho kongoke ifumana interest. And yona ayifane ke iye kwa-SARS idlule class 8-year period.
Ngiyacabanga ke Vuyani ukuthi kunemininingwane leminingi lekumele ukuthi umuntu ke ayilandzele ukuze ukuthi aclaim leto mali leto. Ukhona ke lomunye lo ngathi kunengi kakhulu. There's just so much work to be done. There's just so much administration to be carried out for purposes of claiming. So ngayi appointa yini i-tracing agency?
No, thina asivumelekanga ba mas appoint i-tracing agent because siba nengxaki nazo apha e-ofisini ne. Because ziyakwazi ukuza zithi zithunywe yi-Master of the High Court, but eyona nto iba buhlungu because the tracing agent iyayithatha ne-50% of the amount ye-beneficiary. Hence singafuni uba i-tracing agent mazisetyenziswe. And ne-form yethu i-J251 umuntu xa apply inayo i-provision ethi are you aware ba usebenzisa i-tracing agent now?
Okay. Because
eyona ngxaki kabe kukho i-fixed amount masithi i-tracing agent is entitled to 5% okanye 2%, it would be fine. But uyofumana umntana i-tracing agent ithathe yonke sometimes imali yakhe.
Okay. All right, Vuyani, please stay on the line. And Giselle will also come back to you in just a moment. But for now, let's take a quick break. Mbukeli Siphinzela ngasetitolo, please stay with us. Yilungelo Lakho. Welcome back, Mbukeli. Khumbula ukuthi nawe ke ungaba ke ingxenye yalolu hlelo ke ngivakalisa umbono wakho ngikuthi ushaya lecingo ku 011 714 6918 noma ke 011 714 6919. Ungasithumela futhi ne-email ku consumer@sabc.co.za. You can also like our Facebook page and post your comments or your views or even your questions there. Today we are discussing the beneficiary fund and as well as the guardians fund. What is the difference between the two? Nekuthi ke yini kumele ukuthi ukwazi ukuze ukuthi uclaim under the guardian fund noma ke i-beneficiary fund. Sina Deputy Master we Cape Town High Court Vuyani Lale, siphinze sibe na Giselle Gould, yena ke uyi-director ke of business development Fairheads Benefit Services. Now Giselle, let me bring you into this conversation. Is there a way of avoiding, avoiding some of the funds from being forfeited by the states or for being benefiting other people who are not supposed to benefit from these funds in the first place?
Do you mean in terms of the 30-year term and beneficiaries forfeiting their rights to it?
Yes, indeed, the latter part.
Yes. So I would assume that would require a legislative change, and I'm sure Vuyani can enlighten us about that. But I do think it is something that needs to be considered because sometimes it does take a long time to find people or a long time for people to realize that they actually have money in the Guardians Fund and to make those claims. So I do think there needs to be a change and a fairer way to deal with that.
What about if one needs funds for day-to-day issues, such as paying school fees? Is the process still the same?
So for beneficiary funds, that is one of our main purposes to ensure that the day-to-day needs of that child can be met. So for instance, making sure school fees is paid for that child, making sure there's a monthly stipend for your daily needs, like your toiletries, groceries, that kind of thing. But then there's also other claims, like for instance, your stationery, your school uniform, your school transport, clothing, which those things you don't necessarily, you can submit a claim for that and we can pay that directly to the guardian or to the service provider. For instance, when we pay school fees, we will pay that directly to the school. So we know that account is settled with the permission of the legal guardian or the caregiver. And that is a big priority in beneficiary funds, that the daily needs of that child is met and that child becomes educated. Because the intention is also, as you are educating those children and you can get them through the entire school career, they too can then be economically functional and viable in society and be able to take care of themselves. So the beneficiary fund is to make sure you get that child from where he or she is at the time of the death of his or her parent until they can actually fully take care of themselves as a grown-up.
Okay. If for various reasons, Giselle, my last will does not specify that maybe my employee benefits should be transferred to a testamentary trust, can the minor child's inheritance be transferred to a beneficiary fund?
So that decision will rest with the trustees of the pension or provident fund that your parents belong to. So they decide what is the best decision for that child, what is going to work best for that child. Because, for instance, if you compare a testamentary trust with a beneficiary fund, you often find that a testamentary trust has its own rules. So me, as the person that created that trust, the deceased parent, would have stated, for instance, that I only want my child to get his or her benefits when they're 25 or 30 or whatever age they decide. Whereas in a beneficiary fund, which is part of the Pension Funds Act, you are compelled to consider age 18, and if you believe that it's in the interest of that child to keep it longer, you may do so as a trustee. And secondly, sometimes you find that the beneficiary, for instance, has a legal disability where, for instance, they're not capable of taking care of their own affairs. So in that instance, you obviously won't want to pay them at 18. You would keep it until they actually pass on.
Okay, all right. Good point that you've made, Giselle. Now, Vuyani-ke njengoba bowushito-ke phambilini ukuthi njalo nje ngabo-September hulumende ukhipha-ke i-list of beneficiaries who have not claimed the money-ke ku-Government Gazette. So nangabe-ke ligama lami likhona kuleyo list, yini ekumele ukuthi ngikwende? Hi, Vuyani, did you get that question? Hi, Vuyani, are you still there with us? Okay, we seem to have lost Vuyani. Now, Giselle, let me also pick up on this conversation with you with regards to the paying out of the employee benefits.
Yes.
Yeah.
At what stage?
Okay, so in terms of the paying out of the employee benefits, you find that a person has got various funds at the different employments or the former places of employments, and only one place of employment or employer comes forth with information that he actually has funds allocated in that particular employment fund. So what happens then to the others who haven't come forth?
Yes, that is quite a complication in the industry, Simpiwe, because, for instance, people may be in full-time employment and have a retirement fund with their employer. And then, for instance, they may have retirement annuities in the individual capacities, or they may have retirement fund membership with previous employers. So each board of trustees of each of those entities have the responsibility to investigate who the dependents of that deceased fund member is. The problem is you then find that different boards of trustees come up with different distributions. And that is where the concern is. So one of the issues we've raised with the financial FSCA was that there needs to be some kind of a database or something where there needs to be consolidation or interaction between these different boards so that we all work on the same basis and the same information from families so that the distribution across the different funds should be the same. And everybody should be treated fairly from that family in that way. But I think we still have quite a way to go with that in terms of developing the legislation. Yeah. But it has been brought to the regulators' attention. Hopefully we'll get there one day.
Okay, we certainly hope so too. And we'll touch base with Vuyani with regards to the legislative element of that issue. All right, please stay on the line, Giselle. We'll continue this conversation in a moment. Let's take another break. Stawuphinze sibuye mbukeli ungasanyakadi leli Yilungelo Lakho. Leli Yilungelo Lakho namhla sikhuluma nge-beneficiary fund kanye-ke ne-guardians fund ukuthi-ke bobani kumele-ke bathole imali under i-guardian fund noma-ke i-beneficiary fund. Ungasishayela-ke licingo ku-0117146918 noma 0117146919 ubeke-ke umbono wakho noma-ke ubute umbuto. Sinetini intethu-ke lapha namhla-ke sina Vuyani Lali, deputy master of the Cape Town High Court, utachazela kabanti-ke nge-guardian fund. Siphinde sibe na Giselle Gould, yena-ke uyi-director we-Fairheads Business Solutions noma-ke Fairheads Benefit Services, utasichazela kabanti-ke yena nge-beneficiary fund. Now Vuyani-ke phambilini uke wakhuluma nge-government gazette ukuthi-ke every September noma-ke ngayo yonke iminyaka ngaSeptember uhulumende ukhipha-ke i-list yalabo bantu labo lekumele ukuthi bakleme imali tabo ukuthi-ke nangabe ngiyayibona ligama lami lapha kuleyo list yile kumele ukuthi ngikwende.
Awulibonile igama lakho elistini funeke uze apha e-ofisini okanye uye to the nearest master of the High Court okanye to the magistrate court. Zikhona ii-forms phaa ozifilishayo ekuthiwa yi-J251 so that you apply it. And sinayo imiqathango okanye i-requirements that you need to comply with.
Ngimaphi-ke lawo ma-requirements lawo?
For instance, into esizayifuna sizofuna i-ID, certified ID copy yakho, i-bank account yakho, i-statement, ikhona into esithi ngu-movie, where we must get your full fingerprint. We liaise directly with Home Affairs so that siyazi uba nyhani sibhatala lo mntu uaplayayo.
Okay, so le mali ngiyitfola isizumbulo noma-ke ngiyitfola ngamancozincozi? Sengisho ukuthi le mali-ke le ngitayiclaima i-guardians fund inginika le mali isizumbulo noma-ke as a lump sum noma-ke ngiyitfola ngamancozincozi noma-ke in installments?
Zikhona i-scenarios ngokuba xa umntana esemncinci sibhatala what you call i-allowance, sibhatala ngezavenga. So umzali uyakwazi umane ezo-aplaya apha e-ofisini so that sibhatale for i-school fees, sibhatale for impahla, sibhatale for i-medical aid, zonke ii-needs zomntana azifunayo, provided imali is-sufficient. Ngoku umntana xa na-18 years, when the child is 18 or above 18 years, it's only then that we will pay the lump sum. But still, it depends. If the deceased usweleke any will, if by will yenza provision by imali mayibhatalwe at the age of, let's say 23, 24, then it had to go to funeke silandele the wishes of the deceased. But normally GPF yona imali, the government employees pension fund, ngokuba iyayibhatala imali apha kuthi, siyibhatala at the age of 18. But before siyibhatale, you must have turned 18, not before the age of 18.
Okay, nangabe uhulumende-ke udecidile lokuthi no le mali sitayinika noma-ke siyipay out in installments, ngingakhona yini kubese ngicela i-advance ngithi kule installment yakule nyanga lena ngiva ngathi le mali incane kakhulu, ndawucela-ke imali ya next month ngoba ngifuna kubhadala ti-school fees, ngoba ngifuna kulungisa indlu yabantwana ngoba seyiyanetha, ngakhona yini ukuthola i-advance from that particular fund?
Into yenzekayo especially xa kufuneke ziyafika ezo zicelo uba ndifuna ulungisa indlu, sijonga i-amount because it's always better uba xa silungisa indlu erejistarishwe egameni lomntana, because bear in mind uba asikwazi uba at the end of the day uzowuphinda utshate ube i-father-in-law okanye i-stepfather simkhuphe umntana kuloo ndlu kodwa indlu ilungiswe ngemali yomntana. So in short, what I'm trying to say, siyayithenga indlu for umntana, should there be sufficient funds, and we insist that that property must be registered in the name of the minor.
Okay. So is there a list yema needs lendawa that you will take care of or cater for, or mina ke ngaqhamuka nje noma ngabe ngiphi i-reason ukuthi ngicela imali yekwenta ABC?
Yeah, asina list as such, but funeke xa masithi umntana othi ufuna uba masibhatale school fees, kuzofuneka sifumane ileta from esikolweni echazayo uba yimalini echazayo uba lo mntana is school going. Then thina xa sibhatala, especially when it's school fees, we pay directly to the school. Yeah. For instance, umntana ufuna i-medical aid, we also pay for a medical aid.
Okay. All right, please stay on the line, Vuyani. We'll certainly touch base with you in a moment. But for now, let's take our first caller. We've got an anonymous caller from the Northwest Province. Anonymous caller, good afternoon.
Afternoon, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you, ma'am?
Fine. I just want to know the requirement of the life partner, if the life partner wants to also claim on her behalf.
So if the partner wants to claim on my behalf, is that what you're asking?
Of her behalf, for her late fiancé, what are the requirements?
Okay, Anonymous, thank you so much for your call. We'll pose that question back to Vuyani. Now, Vuyani, I'm sure you heard that caller. A life partner wants to claim on the fiance's behalf. What is the process there?
Ingaba imali ikhona e-Guardians Fund.
Yeah,
because xa ifuna uaplaya then ithetha ukuthi funeka sithumele all the requirements esizazinida. For instance, into esiyenzayo sithi xa engumntana uhlala nomama okanye uhlala nomakhulu, ngokuba into esiyifumanisileyo kakhulu, we have discovered that maybe the natural guardian will apply for the funds, but only to find that the child or the minor child is staying with Ukraine in the Eastern Cape. So what we do, we would request a social worker's report. A social worker's report gives us a detailed account of where the child is residing, because you must bear in mind that we pay to the person ohlala nomntana.
Okay, so where do I send those requirements that I've just mentioned? What are those details?
I-requirements zikhona apha e-ofisini, but zikhona nakwenye any magistrate office okanye nase-master's office ezinearer kuwe. Umntu xa aplaya awunidi uza e-master's office, because the Department of Justice, we bring justice services closer to the people. So the nearest magistrate office where you are, you can go and apply there, because we do train most of the magistrate personnel instead of a Guardians Fund.
So is there a way of avoiding the entire Guardian Fund process if ngifuna ngekushiya inheritance yemntwanami?
Can you repeat the question again, sir?
Ikhona ke indlela yokuthi ngi-avoid the entire Guardian Fund process nangabe ke ngifisile ke kushiya inheritance yemntwanami or a minor?
Yeah, iyadependa kuwe, but as babe nditshilo kuqala, our examiners and our assistant masters, umntana omncinci cannot speak for himself, especially when there are fights, they're adults.
Yes.
So it's on those bases that kuzothiwa uba imali mayibhatalwe e-Guardians Fund. Okanye if ba uthi you don't want to deposit the funds into the Guardians Fund, you want to invest it maybe with a particular company, Fairheads. I see there's Giselle, the Fairheads.
Yes.
Then it means you must provide us with security.
Okay, all right, great point you made there. Thank you so much for that. Please stay on the line. Stop in the sibuye kuwe ke imizuzwe lemfishane ke. Mbukeli, let's start careful. Stop in the sibuye khona nyalo. Welcome back everybody. Nangabe ucesa ke kusijoyina ke ngiyathemba ukuthi kukhona ke lokuncane longakuqosha ke njengoba ke lesi kusicepho sethu sekugcina ke selungelo lakho. Namhlanje sikhuluma nge-beneficiary fund. Ukuthi yini beneficiary fund? Bobani ke labangayithola ke imali under that particular beneficiary fund. Ukuthi ke yini ama processes lekumele ukuthi walandzele ukuze ukuthi ke uclaim imali takho under that fund. Siphinde sibe ne guardians fund. Ukuthi ke yini ke lemele ukuthi ukwende ukuze uclaim ke imali takho under that fund. Sina Vuyani Lali, Deputy Master of the Cape Town High Court via Skype. Siphinde sibe na Giselle Gould from the Fairheads Benefit Solutions. Now Giselle, if I'm a beneficiary of the beneficiary fund, do I have to claim, or am I allowed to claim for social security benefits, for instance?
That is obviously a situation where the legal guardian of that child or the caregiver of that child has to follow that process. So, for instance, if that person then applies to social development for a child grant, they will apply the means test in terms of, in fact, no. For children, they won't apply the means test. So if the income of that family is below a certain level, I think that child will automatically qualify for a child's grant. I think Vuyani can clarify that too. But I think it's a question of the income of the family that determines whether the child gets a child grant. But that would not impact on the fact, well, I don't know whether social development would also want to know about the beneficiary fund or not. Because obviously the beneficiary fund assets for that child would also be assets in the name of that child.
Okay.
So it could be that would be required in terms of the means test.
All right, great point there. Thank you. Let's take our next caller. Sinano Zipho ke ula iJozi sakumule ehleleni sawubona.
Yebo njani?
Siyaphila kunjani mama?
Ngiyaphila.
Khuluma nathi baba. What's on your mind?
Okay. Ngicela une-question baba. Ngicela ukubuza ubabami bekangishiyele imali bekasebenza eBrewery.
Okay.
And then washona 2002 uthe makashona bengasathandani nomama wami, so angishiyela imali whereby angenzela i-certificate bese aregister ngaso imali, and then le certificate angenzele ngaso mina nginesinye engithathelwe yiso umama wami esi-original. So ubabami uye wathatha i-certificate wabhala i-ID number wagama noZipho Mbatha, which is his surname. So now ngahamba, when the time goes on, ngahamba bangifonela baka fund beneficiary bathi ngize ngizocela imali, and then ngabachazela mabe ngibuza ukuthi igama lami ngobani, ngithi nguNozipho Zwane. So bona bathi under imali kubhalwe noZipho Mbatha. Angihambe ngaba explain ukuthi kwenzeka kanjani ukuthi ba register i-certificate sakwambatha. So bathi angifune leso certificate, ngahamba kwi-family yakababami ngasicela leso certificate banginika. So manje if ngithi ngifuna ukuclaima lezo mali bathi angihambe ngiyokhansela lesa certificate esi-wrong, ngiregister lesi engibiza ngaso lesi my original esami. Mangihamba nge-Home Affairs bangibuza ukuthi ubani wayengenzele leso certificate, ngiyabatshela ngithi ubabami. So like kuloku ma-beneficiary bethe bona bafuna ngenze i-notification letter esho ukuthi ngisikhanselile le certificate lesi sakwambatha, and then ngiregister lesi si-original esithi noZipho Zwane. So e-Home Affairs abakhona ukungisiza, angazi ukuthi ngenze kanjani.
Kunginamuhla nje usengayitfola leyo mali.
Kunamuhla ngisengakayitholi leyo mali. Ubaba mushone 2002.
Okay, please stay on the line. Sina, Deputy Master of the Cape Town High Court. Vuyani, I'm sure you've been listening to the query by the caller there. Kuthi ungathanza kum-engage noma ke umphendvule ke kuleyo nkinga lekanayo.
No, into benofuna establish where is the money deposited, because you must bear in mind that when we pay, the one who alleges must prove that it is indeed I am entitled to these funds, because at the end of the day you might find that there is another Vuyani Lali, we share the same, not necessarily the same ID, but the same date of birth. So now when we pay only to find that we're paying to the incorrect person, and then it means that the state is going to be liable. So we always want proof. For instance, hence I'm asking, in which monies are those funds deposited? In which fund? In which guardians fund? Is it Pretoria? Because we've got 6 guardians funds in South Africa.
Did you get that question? Ukuthi ke ikuphi ke leyo mali leyo yafakwa kuyiphi i-guardians fund noZipho?
Mina if bangifonela ngifonela i-kind beneficiary head bathi base Cape Town, so yona angazi ukuthi ikuphi, because mabe ngifonela mina bengithe ukuthi base Cape Town, bangifonela and the number yakhona ithi 012.
Okay, yeah, Vuyani, and I'm sure lena inkinga yabantu abaningi ngoba ke nabatfola licingo from a guardians fund baba bethe lokubuta ukuthi ke bakuyiphi noma ke bakuliphi le office.
No, a guardians fund will never phone you iti unemali in the guardians fund. We don't do that.
Okay.
Normally it will be a tracing agent that phones you to tell you that you've got money here and there. But we, the staff of the guardians fund, will never phone you to say that you've got money. Bear in mind that when we receive a deposit, for instance, I'll make an example from an estate. We receive the deposit. We don't have any details regarding the beneficiary. The only thing that we will have is the ID. Even when we receive monies from GPF will give us the address of the person who's looking after the child, but we don't go out to look for that child. We only act once the person comes to our office to make an application.
Okay, so for purposes of solving inkinga yaNozipho kumele ukuthi endeni manje?
No, bendizothi uNozipho ningamnika i-details zam because ebekhe wathetha nango-012.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether, because the 012 would be Pretoria, but angamnika i-details zam so that sikhe establish about where was these funds paid, so that nathi we can inquire from where the source of the funds originate from. Ingathi bandiphazame bethe kusemine andithi. I'm not sure if mandive kakuhle, so that we can inquire from the person who paid the funds. Because bear in mind, when monies are deposited into the Guardians Fund, the Guardians Fund would issue a receipt as form of an acknowledgement that indeed these funds are deposited into the Guardians Fund.
All right, siyabonga kakhulu. Nozipho, I'm sure you've been assisted. Ngiyathemba ukuthi usitakele kulelo hlangothi sitawuzama ukuxhumanisa ke nalo hhovisi ke le Master of the High Court. And for more details, we'll be posting those details on our Facebook page, Yilungelo Lakho. So please make sure that you log on to Facebook and just take a look at that particular detail. Now, Vuyani, just before we close the show, ngicela ukubuza kabanti ke Vuyani ukuthi nangabe a beneficiary is also a beneficiary of other social grants. Ukuthi ingabe ke uyaqualify ukuthola leyo Guardian Fund?
We don't look at a means test, because if imali is paid into the Guardians Fund, itshela ukuthi imali yalo beneficiary. We don't look at a means test. Even noba ungafumani i-pension ezingakanani na, as long as you've got money in the Guardians Fund, it means that those funds are yours. You are entitled to those funds. Okay. But maybe mandichaze nento esohlulayo from Giselle and other trust funds. I-Guardians Fund, imali yethu xa ingenile, if the money is in the Guardians Fund, we don't charge any administrative cost. If by imali yakho ingene 10,000, the interest that you get, you will get it until ude uzoclaima. Hence, I'm saying there are no administrative costs that we charge Tina as the Guardians Fund.
Okay. Now, Giselle, as the beneficiary is a member of the beneficiary fund, the remaining balance, what happens to it? The remaining balance of the benefit in the fund, when that particular beneficiary dies, what happens to the remaining balance?
So when the beneficiary passes on, say before we've paid the final balance, normally then we will be notified by the family, and the family then will have to get either a letter of appointment from the master or a letter of executorship. And once we have that, then depending if the amount is small or if it's above 125,000 or 250,000, the family then needs to open an estate late account with the bank after they've received the letter from the master, and we will then pay the balance of that child's benefit into that bank account.
And if the estate is not reported to the master's office, can it then be escalated or dispensed to the master's Guardian Fund?
No. So what would normally happen, say for instance, we pay a monthly benefit to that family. They then have the owners to come to us. If we check once a year whether that child is still alive. So if the family hasn't reported it, we will pick it up when we do our annual checks. So for instance, we will check with the Home Affairs database too, to look for dead or alive status. And if, for instance, the family didn't report that to us, we will pick it up via the Home Affairs database, and we will then stop any payments, monthly payments, for instance, to the family. They then need to initiate the process with reporting that death to the master and take the process from there so that we can pay the balance out into the estate late bank account for that deceased child.
So which authorities then do I need to report to if I have a beneficiary fund?
So it falls under the Pension Funds Act, which means it's the financial sector authority that will look after that. You don't need to report it to anybody. Normally, there'll be communication between the retirement fund and the family with regard to who the dependents are of that deceased retirement fund member. And that process will then, once that monies have been allocated to the child, will be sent to Feds, and Feds will then communicate with the family to say that that particular child's account has been set up with his or her assets, and this is how we're going to work together in terms of taking care of the daily needs and the well-being of that child. So the regulator is the FSCA, but there's direct communication between the beneficiary fund, the retirement fund, and the family to make sure the child appropriately benefits from the assets that have been left for him or her.
All right, Giselle, thanks for your thoughts and for your analysis of this particular matter. Now, Vuyani, as we close the show, please be as brief as you possibly can. Nangabe ngiyathi-ke ukuthi-ke kunetimali tami under a garden fund, but I'm not sure ukuthi-ke ngatitfola kanjani, nekuthi ngimalini, nekuthi yile kumele ngikwente. What do I need to do?
Into efuneke uyenzile xa uyazi ba okanye awuyazi okanye xa uyazi ba unemali eGardens Fund, awuzovele ufone nje uthi ndingubani bani ndifuna ujonga imali bayingabi khona yomntana, because kungenzeka basithetha ne-tracing agent. Normally what we would insist on, we would request that you send us a letter or an email with the minor's birth certificate, because as I said, we have problems with tracing agents in the Gardens Fund. But as Babendi Chilo, a Gardens Fund, it's in 6 provinces. Although each and every province in a master of the High Court, I think in the near future we will be opening other offices in those. Okay. Because for instance, in Pretoria, services in Northwest, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, okay, all those.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, Vuyani, but then thank you so much for your time. Vuyani Lali, Deputy Master of the Cape Town High Court, and as well as Giselle Gould from the Fairheads Benefit Services. Thanks to you two for joining us. We appreciate your time. Let me thank our studio guests for making time to be with us today on today's discussion. Please join us again next time for another consumer affairs topic. From Miss Mpio Ngongane and the rest of the team, do have a great week. Cheers.
Yilungelo